Reading from Ephesians chapter 4, starting at verse 25. Paul's rules for the new life. So then, putting away all falsehood, let all of us speak the truth to our neighbors, for we are members of one another. Be angry, but do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and do not make room for the devil. Thieves must give up stealing. Rather, let them labor and work honestly with their own hands, so as to have something to give to the needy. Let no evil talk come out of your mouths, but only what is useful for building up, as there is need, so that your words may give grace to those who hear. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with which you were marked with a seal for the day of redemption. Put away from you all bitterness and wrath and anger and wrangling and slander, together with all malice. And be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ has forgiven you. Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and live in love as Christ loved us, and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. In 1998, in a book called Contemporary Worship for the 21st Century, Daniel Benedict and Craig Miller wrote, "Younger generations will have a field day developing and inventing new ways to communicate and to escape into the cyber world of computer-based technologies. A major challenge for the church will be to discover ways to create Christian community when the individual becomes primary. How do you offer God's grace, found in Jesus Christ, to individuals who are isolated and insulated from their geographic community?" 22 years later, those words, isolated and insulated, really hit home, as many of our churches struggle to find ways to offer God's grace in Jesus Christ in this time when we are encouraged not to gather. Our cyber world has become our number one means of communication. It has also redefined the question, who is my neighbor? We could be sitting at the same table and yet be off in different corners of the world. Back when I was a kid, the youth pastor had to remind us your neighbor is not just the family living next door to you, but also the person down the block, across town, in another state, even people in China. Today, via the internet, I can be closer to someone in China than I am to my own next-door neighbor. These days, the pastor has to remind the congregation that the folks next door are also your neighbors. Here in the church, we're doing the best we can with what we have in order to get the word out. My Bible study today begins in Ephesians chapter 4, in which there are instructions about how we should live in community with one another. In this text, Paul's statements echo some of the 10 Commandments God gave to Moses. But Paul goes beyond just saying, "Thou shalt not." Alongside of the "thou shalt nots" are statements about what we should be doing instead. Verse 25, putting away all falsehood, then speak the truth. Verse 26, it's okay to get angry, but do something about it. Don't let it lead you into sin, and don't go to bed angry. And I think verse 28 most clearly demonstrates Paul's pattern in teaching us that there are three parts to deal with. Part 1 says, if you are a thief, stop stealing. Part 2 says, take up honest work. Part 3, take up honest work so as to have something to share with the needy. That's what we call atonement. Undo the negative by turning your life back to making a positive contribution. Work honestly and give something back. What I notice here in Paul's teachings is there's no neutral ground. Every time you give up something that you know you should not be doing, fill in the blank with something good. Make a positive impact. Verse 29 says, let not evil talk come out of your mouth. Whenever you speak about someone else, it should be for the purpose of building that person up, encouraging the other, pointing out the good things about that person. Again, I see the same three-step pattern. You said something hurtful about someone else. What should you do? Well, stop saying hurtful things. Second, start saying positive things. Third, use your new positive way of talking to build someone up. Verse 29 continues, so that your words may give grace to those who hear. That is, be pleasant to listen to. Impact a person's senses in a positive way. Someone who was always positive and encouraged me often in the first church I served was a woman named Hulda Buschendorf. She was a widow at the time, but she and her husband was Methodist pastor, served for many years in churches around Wisconsin. And when visiting with her, she would inevitably come up with old bits of wisdom that still work. And one of her favorites was, you can catch more bees with honey than you can with vinegar. A sweet fragrance draws us in. It's pleasant to our sense of smell. And it's one of those things that I cannot get from my computer or from my cell phone. You can't get a sweet fragrance from cyber technology. One thing that always gets my attention is the sweet fragrance of a nice loaf of bread fresh out of the oven. I used to love that loaf of bread as much as anything else. Mom would work all day on it. Sometimes she would let me help, mixing up the dough, kneading the dough, raising the dough, punching it down, let it rise again, put it in the oven and let it bake. And it would come out of the oven hot and steamy. And I would be there with a knife and butter. And if I was quick, I could have 2 or 3 slices down before Mom said, save some for the others. Jesus says in John chapter 6, verse 33, I am the bread of life. I hear those words, and first thing I think about the pleasing fragrance of that loaf of bread, fresh from the oven. Jesus, the bread of life, intrudes into my life like a sweet fragrance. Dietrich Bonhoeffer taught us that our Christian faith is more than a spiritual faith. Christianity is spiritual becoming physical. Jesus is the Word become flesh. Our faith does not declare, he says, that there is just a God out there watching over us. Our faith teaches us that there is a God out there who came down here, lived among us, took up space, impacted our world, touched our lives, and still does live among us, take up space in our midst, impact our world, and touch our lives. Jesus refuses to be just an omniscient spiritual presence that we can ignore anytime we want to. Jesus is right here, dwelling among us. We may be isolated and insulated from many of our fellow humans, but never from Jesus. Paul, following Jesus' example, says, I have to intrude myself upon others by being a fragrant offering. A fragrant offering. Another reminder, we cannot be neutral. Neutral means zero impact. We need to strive for positive impact. In these times of COVID-19, many people are striving to make positive impact. Researchers are working on finding answers. Healthcare workers are tending the sick. Police continue to patrol our neighborhoods. Neighbors are helping neighbors. We pray constantly for those we have come to call the front line in this virus, this battle against this virus that's invaded our world. And as we are looking for ways to make a positive impact, remember, prayer is our most powerful gift. Our powerful link to one another is not the internet, but is the Holy Spirit of God, which binds all the faithful into one body. And if every member of the body does their part, we will make a difference. One week I was camping at Peninsula State Park here in Wisconsin. And while registering for my campsite, the ranger handed me a leaflet. It had a sketch of a certain flowering plant. It was, he said, an invasive plant that was crowding out the indigenous plants. And the leaflet asked all of us in the park to pull out those weeds and dispose of them. Well, I got to my campsite and I noticed many of those invasive weeds were growing all around my campsite. So every day in camp, I gave time and I pulled weeds. I couldn't do the whole campground. I couldn't do the whole park. But I could do my little bit. And at the end of the week, my campsite was free of those weeds.